So guys, I didn't want to do another video about Jeet Kune Do as far as what it is and what it isn't, because I sort of went over that before a couple of times. But whenever I'm like conversing with people online, there's still a lot of misinformation about it from people who even formally take Jeet Kune Do. This happened again in on a black belt post. I was simply admiring the fact that Sifu Ron Balicki was offering a demo, a JKD demo, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember doing that drill." Actually, he was doing the very drill that I've posted here on this channel, and I'm going to link that. It's kind of janky because it was me learning it at the last minute, um, and practicing it with a friend. And it was a lot of steps, so I was already tired and trying to remember what the steps were. And it was cool. Sifu Ron Balicki, for folks that don't know, is like I would say like a first generation JKD student, certified under Guru Dan and Asanto. For people who don't understand the difference between the honorary titles like Sifu and Guru, Guru means teacher in Filipino, Shifu in Chinese. So they're interchangeable depending on what art is being taught at the time. We might refer to someone as crew, which is more is Thai for teacher, okay, and Adjarn, master in Thai and so forth. I don't want to get into the honorifics, but I just don't want people to be confused if they hear me call someone crew this, Shifu that, or Guru that. We all often call Dan and DeSanto by Guru instead of Shifu because he brought in a lot of those Filipino arts, Filipino martial arts, into the JKD family system of fighting uh, arts. So, and that gets into all of the confusion that I wanted to highlight here. So the drill that Ron Balicki is showing in this recent black belt video, I was saying, yeah, hey, I remember that drill. And then I commented under someone else who was asking, what is he practicing? And I was saying, it's John Fan Jeet Kune Do. Um, and that caused a unnecessary stir amongst people because they was like, oh, that's not Jeet Kune Do, or that looks like Kali to me. And I was like, well, guys, we practice it in Jeet Kune Do, but it comes from Penchak Salat. And I believe it may be even the Salat system further developed by Giro Dan and Santo himself, named which was termed Mafalando Salat. But the type of Salat that I learned outside of the JKD curriculum itself was Bhakti Nagara Panchat Salat, which I learned in Indonesia and Bali specifically, and I see that other practice in the JKD curriculum as well. Off of that, so it was some back and forth with people, and I tried to stay above the fray and the insults about what is Jeet Kune Do, what isn't Jeet Kune Do, who's to say that this and that, and I was saying, well, guys, it is. I said, I said, I understand. So I was like, I clarified. I was like, well, he's showing a drill from Salat that we practice in Jeet Kune Do. I was like, and if you look at the caption in the video, it also says that he's doing Salat, which someone later tried to use against me, even though I literally just said that in one of the comments itself. And then people were saying this is in Jeet Kune Do. And one guy who, I always tend, before I respond to someone in some sort of online dispute, I click on their page. I don't know if that's cyber stalking or not, but I'd rather know whom I'm dealing with before I engage in any potential conversation with them, because that will already tell me don't even respond, or respond with baby gloves, or this person seems intellectually mature enough that I can, just speak candidly. So in any case, I did that and saw that he was actually under Shifu Jerry Poteet. uh, who teaches Jeet Kune Do, but was certified under Dan Inosanto, but he sort of rejected the Jeet Kune Do concepts thing. And so this is where I'm gonna go into these different terms and the history of things, because it's confusing not only to people outside of Jeet Kune Do, but it's confusing to people within Jeet Kune Do. It even confused me for a long time. So I'm gonna go way, way back into the history, and I invite anyone watching who has a background in Jeet Kune Do, who's a certified instructor, to correct me, or if someone knows people within the Lee family or the Inosanto family or the Balicki family, to correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm gonna go off what I've been told and what I've discovered through some online research here and there from the last 30 years and black belt magazines and whatever literature I could get my hands on since I was a kid and loving this stuff because I'm a martial arts nerd. Okay, so let's take it way, way, way back to Bruce Lee himself. So, as far as I understand, his first formal instruction was in Wing Chun Kung Fu under Ip Man. Although I think he learned informally Tai Chi with his father before he got formal instruction. And because of maybe some racism or some other issues, I don't think Ip Man taught him personally. He was taught by instead one of Ip Man's head students. But at that time, I'm not even sure if it was due to that. That might just be what people would think because Bruce was 3/4 Chinese and not pure Chinese because his mother was half German. Um, but if that was the case, again, it would have been the norm for like the head student to teach a class, not the instructor or founder of the school himself. So he learned little from Ip Man himself, and this was Wing Chun Kung Fu. This is Bruce's founding style, but along the way he also learned some other kung fu styles, both northern and southern. And I don't want to get into that distinction either. Uh, a nice generalization between the difference between northern kung fu and southern kung fu is northern kung fu tends to have more emphasis on the legs and kicks, whereas southern kung fu has a emphasis more on hand techniques. And supposedly the reason for that for the differences in the emphasis in the different styles was that the north was more rocky and mountainous, so that led to more emphasis on kicking and leg strength and so forth. In any case, his formal instruction was in Wing Chun Kung Fu, and he blended that with some other stuff he learned along the way. And he also, in high school, did a little bit of boxing and won actually a high school boxing Golden Gloves championship back in the say late 50s, early 60s. And he had some trouble. He ended up coming to the U.S. to finish high school and started attending college at University of Washington in Seattle, I believe, and started teaching there. At that time, what he was teaching was pure kung fu and mostly Wing Chun. He called it at the time the Tao of Kung Fu. So, and his first student I've mentioned a month ago was a black guy, Jesse Glover. So the stuff that he was originally teaching was Tao of Kung Fu, and we see there was a evolution of his martial arts. So you could say it was a system comprising three different arts, and I'll get into that more right now. So in that early 60s, late 50s period, he was teaching a small group of friends his Tao of Kung Fu, and based on whatever situation he got into with Wong Jackman or whatever the guy's name is. I'm sorry if I can't remember his exact name, but this fight between he and his guy is legendary, and there's so much myth and rumor thrown around that we don't really know what actually happened. Some say that Bruce had outfought this guy, and that they fought basically because Bruce refused not to teach uh, Americans, and I don't really believe that was the case. Um, I think what it was more of is that um, Bruce's introductory into the Chinatown world of martial arts may have rubbed a few shoulders because, he was a confident guy, maybe a little cocky. That sounds familiar. But no, in any case, for whatever reason they actually fought, it's still in the air whether he outfought Wong Jack Man outfought him. They fought to a standstill. But whatever the case was, Bruce was dissatisfied with the fight and started uh, cross training at the time. Before this was done, like now it's almost is unheard of, except in some traditional martial arts still. But in most modern day martial arts and combat sports, you're expected to cross train in running, weight training, those sorts of things, conditioning. He was one of the first ones to do that. This is one of the reasons why they call Bruce Lee the father of MMA or whatever. So he added that, and he actually started like a voracious studying of boxing, particularly like videos of people like Jack Dempsey and I can't remember others. Maybe people like Rocky Marciano. Um, uh, I know he looked at a little bit of Muhammad Ali stuff as well, and Sugar Ray Robinson, I believe. So looking at stuff like that, and something a lot of people didn't also realize he was looking at was Savat, the, which I'm gonna get into more, which is a French style of martial arts, and fencing, particularly I think épée fencing, as opposed to foil and saber. I think he looked into like some of the concepts and footwork of épée fencing, and he later incorporated that into his art, which became John Fan Gung Fu, named after his Cantonese name, John Fan Lee. Um, and under this, he was at he had a new martial arts school. This time instead of Seattle, I think it was based in I think Oakland, which is where he was living at that Chinatown at the time, the Chinatown in Oakland or San Francisco. I'm sorry, it was in the Bay Area. I know that much. I can't remember if it was Oakland or San Francisco off the cuff, but it was in the Bay Area of California. This was one of his first schools, the John Fan Gung Fu Institute, and he certified a few people. He had a best friend, a Japanese guy, Taki Kimura, who we recognize as Shigang Taki Kimura. Now, he passed away a few years ago. I heard he was a nice guy. I never got the pleasure to meet him. Bruce certified him in John Fan Kung Fu, and not only that, he was the highest ranked in it. So even Dan and Asanto referred to Shigang Taki as his senior, as his as above him. And he also had another friend who unfortunately passed away in like the late 60s, early 70s, James Lee. He wasn't related to Bruce, but he had a background, I believe, in Wing Chun Kung Fu, and did a book with him. I actually have it on Wing Chun Kung Fu, where Bruce served as the technical editor of the book. I'm not sure what a technical editor means, but a lot of people bought that book back in the day just based off of it saying Bruce Lee was the technical editor. Bruce himself published a book, because a lot of people think Bruce never published a book himself while he was alive, that all his books were published after his death. That wasn't true. He did publish a book on the Tao of Kung Fu, which again highlights his style before he transitioned to John Fan Kung Fu, where he streamlined it with more boxing and fencing principles. Okay, and uh, I guess Savat, which needs which gets talked about not enough, and I'm gonna get into that as well. The politics. I'm sorry, this is gonna be a little bit long, guys, but I have to break it down because there's so much confusion about this, and I'm hoping I help a little here. Back to the story. So James unfortunately passed away, and it's not clear whether he certified anyone himself to teach John Fan Kung Fu. Apparently, there was some one or two guys that were certified under him, but they weren't certified to teach it per se. They were just given recognition to have been advanced students. But later on, in the 90s or whatever, now these people are coming up saying they teach original Jeet Kune Do. And that's a whole problem, which I'll belabor here as well. So, so Taki, I don't believe certified anyone other than his son, and I think his son currently teaches people. But back then, Taki really didn't teach anyone other than his son, whom he certified in John Fan Kung Fu. And I want to make the distinction: John Fan Kung Fu is not Jeet Kune Do. It's a part of the evolution of Bruce's art, but they're not the same. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. So later on, Bruce, meets Dan Inosanto and Ted Wong. And he meets Dan Inosanto because Dan at the time was a Kempo instructor under Ed Parker, the famous Ed Parker. And, met him in a tournament, started training with them, and they became really close. And he became one of Bruce's closest friends and personal students. Similar with Ted Wong, they met because I think they lived in the same apartment building in Chinatown, and they were both Chinese, so there was the instant connection. They both spoke Cantonese, and he became a personal friend of Bruce, one of his students, and also someone he used for sparring as a sparring partner. As was Dan Inosanto. They were friends and knew each other. So, it's sad that there was the schism later on. But in any case, Dan ended up becoming the highest certified in Jeet Kune Do, and according to Dan, maybe the only one that was certified in Jeet Kune Do, because Ted Wong says that he was certified by Bruce in Jeet Kune Do himself, but it was Dan who had the higher ranking than him because he was certified to teach a school. And when Bruce went to Hong Kong to do his movies, he left the school under Inosanto's hands to run. So I'm agnostic on whether Ted Wong actually received certification in Jeet Kune Do under Bruce Lee or not. But it's indisputable that Dan Inosanto did. And those would be the only two who have received Jeet Kune Do instruction from Bruce Lee, not John Fan Kung Fu and not Dao of Kung Fu. Bruce certified Dan in all three of his arts: Dao of Kung Fu, which was like 80% Wing Chun Kung Fu, and a mixture of other northern and southern Chinese styles. Then there was later John Fan Kung Fu, which was more streamlined. It was like still about 50% Wing Chun. Then you had elements of boxing and fencing and Savat. At least what Bruce took to be Savat and Western boxing at the time. Then Jeet Kune Do came as a later expression of that, as he later was a little bit more pessimistic about Wing Chun's ability to be effective against bigger, stronger people, basically Americans, as compared to smaller Asian men. So there was a heavier emphasis on boxing and he started adding other elements that he thought would be useful to him personally and as as to his students. So he added what he thought was Muay Thai and some elements of Filipino martial arts, which some people try to deride Dan to say Bruce never practiced Filipino martial arts. He clearly did. When he was doing nunchucks in those movies, using those Kali sticks, using that staff, that was all Filipino martial arts that he was doing. Uh, Dan even remarked that Bruce started, practicing them so much that he actually got better at it than him. um, but yeah, clearly that was Filipino martial arts because that didn't come from Wing Chun, and it didn't come from wet, and it didn't come from fencing, and it didn't come from boxing. This is important, okay? So we moved into the late 60s, and I believe Jeet Kune Do was established formally in 1967. And by this time, a lot of his original students from Dao of Kung Fu and even Junfang Kung Fu have moved on to other things. Then, Bruce does his movies. Dan and Ted are still teaching here in the States, in California. And Dan is actually a head instructor at one of Bruce's original schools. I believe this is the one in L.A. And then Bruce has his accidental death at 32, and it kind of puts the Jeet Kune Do in an uproar, like what's to be done, because in private conversations with Dan, he had let Dan has said this in several interviews that Bruce didn't want Jeet Kune Do to become a commercial martial art like like karate or judo or kung fu, stuff like that, because he wanted to keep the quality in the art. So this is where the rise of Jeet Kune Do concepts comes in, guys. So Dan and Asanto continued to teach Jeet Kune Do to, you know, to a private group of students at his school. But when he was asked to go do seminars and stuff like that and guest lectures and appearances across the country and across the world, people wanted to know more about Bruce Lee's art. And instead, Dan would usually just teach uh, Filipino martial arts like Kali and stuff like that at these places, but people wanted to know Jeet Kune Do, so he would call it JKD concepts, using some. So he would take some of the stuff from JKD and blend it with the Filipino and Indonesian and other Southeast Asian stuff that he was demonstrating at these seminars. That is where the term Jeet Kune Do concepts came from. It wasn't the attempt to smudge over the original Jeet Kune Do and call anything Jeet Kune Do that Dan fancied. That's just not true. And I'm glad I came from a camp that tried to eschew the whole original JKD versus Jeet Kune Do concepts problem. I'm gonna make this a two-part video because no way I could do it justice in this one video, and I don't want to make it too long for you guys because I know you have a short attention span like I do for just looking at someone's face talking. So here we are. It's 1973. Bruce has died. Dan is still teaching a select group of students Jeet Kune Do while also worldwide spreading the arts of the Philippines and Indonesia and Malaysia and Brunei and Thailand. Muay Thai was not big or well known back then, and uh, Dan got introduced to it through Ajahn Chai Surasute and made it part of his curriculum. So much so that if you wanted to be certified in Jeet Kune Do, you had to be certified in Muay Thai at the time. That later was relaxed, but you still had to be competent in Muay Thai to be a Jeet Kune Do instructor. Where people get it confused is that all these arts were taught separately in the curriculum at his academy, just sort of like at an MMA school now, like where you might have a class for boxing, a class for kickboxing, a class for Muay Thai, a class for wrestling, a class for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. but they're all separate classes. You can attend all of them, or you can attend just one of them that you fancy and forget the rest. You could do the same thing at a JKD school. You could just strictly learn John Fan Gong Fu or Jeet Kune Do and not to do the other stuff. But most people wanted to do everything because they were open minded about martial arts in general. So with that, that's the first part. I'm gonna do this in the second part later, guys. Okay? Because again, I know it's long, and I don't want your eyes to roll too much looking at me talk about this stuff, especially if I'm wrong, which I might be, but I don't think so. All right.